Chapter 9 End of the War. While Washington was busy fighting in the Northeast, the British were taking over the South. In 1778, British troops captured Savannah, Georgia, and just a few weeks later, they took Augusta, Georgia. Charleston, South Carolina also fell to the British. By the summer of 1780, the British held much of the South. In South Carolina, Francis Marion organized a militia. The men called themselves Marion's Brigade. Marion and his men were fearless. They attacked without warning. Then they'd slipped away into the swamps. Marion's brigade helped clear the British out of South Carolina. Francis Marion was called the Swamp Fox. George Washington sent soldiers to help the Patriots. Slowly, luck turned in the South. The colonists began to defeat the British. British retreat to Yorktown. In March 1781, the British suffered a big loss in North Carolina. This was at the Battle of Guilford Courthouse. General Cornwallis commanded the British soldiers. Cornwallis had helped defeat Washington in New York. After this defeat, Cornwallis and his men retreated north to Yorktown, Virginia. Battle of Yorktown. In August 1781, Washington and his soldiers marched to Yorktown. There they joined French troops who had come to help. On his way to Yorktown, Washington visited Mount Vernon for the first time in 6 years. The American troops greatly outnumbered the British troops. Cornwallis expected British ships to sail up the New York River, bringing more soldiers to help, but this did not happen. The Americans fought their way toward the British. When they got close enough, they shelled them with cannon fire. When Washington spotted the French ships, he jumped up and down and waved his hat. Meanwhile, French ships arrived to help the Patriots. They cut off any possibility of a British escape by water. The British had fought their final battle of the war. The British give up. On October 17th, 1781, a drummer boy marched out from the British side. He beat a signal on his drum. A British officer walked beside him. He waved a white handkerchief. Everyone knew this was a sign of surrender. One by one, the guns fell silent. Surrender means to admit defeat and give up. Washington accepted the British surrender, and 2 days later, British soldiers laid down their muskets before the Americans. Half the British army in America had been captured or killed. Then the French and the Americans formed opposite lines. The lines stretched a mile long. George Washington sat on his horse at the head of his men. As the British Army band played, their soldiers marched off the battlefield. The fighting was finally over. The British band played an old army tune called "The World Turned Upside Down." Washington's farewell. Peace talks began in Paris. They lasted for 2 years, and in September of 1783, the Treaty of Paris ended the American Revolution. In December, George Washington gathered his officers to say farewell. He walked around the room shaking hands and embracing his men. As Washington did this, he began to weep. Soon all the men were weeping with him. They had been through terrible times together, and at last their dream of a free country had come true. Benjamin Franklin and John Adams helped write the treaty. Then Washington rode away to his beloved home, Mount Vernon. He arrived on Christmas Eve. He didn't know he would soon have to leave his home again, this time to serve as the first president of the United States. Washington's white horse Nelson carried him throughout the war. The importance of the war. Everyone was overjoyed that the war was over, but America still had a very long road ahead. A new country needed to be created, a country with freedom and justice for all. The patriots of the American Revolution suffered great hardships for their liberty. Many left their families for years. Many risked death, disease, and freezing weather, but they did not give up. They remain our heroes even today. Their struggles taught us that ordinary people can do amazing things, and these things can change the world.